Hey there, welcome back to the channel. On this channel, one of the main goals is to curate a playlist of classical music for sleep and relaxation. But we don't just want to give you the pieces, we want to go into why these pieces might possibly be good for relaxation. So today we're going to lay a foundation for what makes a piece of classical music relaxing, and I'm going to go over the top 5 most common or stereotypical pieces of classical music to listen to for sleep. So let's get into it. Hey everyone, my name is Matthew, and welcome to Calm Insomniac, where we're a community of people trying to get a better night's sleep. If you're new here, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for notifications. Our first goal for today is to go over some of the criteria that can make a piece of classical music good for relaxation. But before we go any further, there's something that I have to address. Remember that I'm an orchestra conductor, I'm a trained classical musician, and I can already hear some of my colleagues screaming at me saying, "You're telling people that classical music is boring," and I want to be very clear about this. Classical music is not boring. This is something that we commonly hear, but the truth is, it's not that the music is boring, it's that the listener doesn't understand or know much about the genre. Like all genres, classical music can express the entire range of emotions. If you listen to Mozart, you might hear something that is extremely happy, but you could also listen to a piece that is really sad. Beethoven often sounds like struggle or power, and if you listen to a Strauss tone poem, you'll hear the entire range of emotions in about 15 to 30 minutes. But the so-called boredom comes from just not knowing anything about the genre. So as a personal example, I do really enjoy listening to jazz, but I particularly like jazz from the classic big band era. Newer, more free-form styles of jazz, I really don't know anything about, and so my instinct is to say that that type of jazz is boring. The truth is, it's not. I just don't understand it, and therefore it's hard for me to find reasons to like or appreciate it. If you're someone who happens to believe that classical music is boring, I hope that as you watch more of my videos and take in more of my content, you'll begin to change your mind and maybe start to appreciate some classical music. Maybe you'll find some pieces you like through the ones that I talk about here. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get into some of the criteria for what can make a piece of classical music relaxing. I recently did a video about what makes music good for sleep and relaxation and why that happens. If you want to check it out, it should be a card right over here. Keep in mind that these criteria are general guidelines. There's nothing that's a hard and fast rule here. The first criteria I want to talk about is we're typically looking for music that is instrumental only. In other words, there's no text, lyrics, nothing sung or spoken. The reason for this is we want our brain to do less work. If we have to process text, there's a couple things that happen. First, our brain is going to listen to the text and we're going to see if we simply just understand what's being said. In other words, is the song in our language? Do we understand the words that are coming out? Not the comprehension, just the words. After that, our brain has to do an additional level of analysis to check for comprehension, or do we understand the story or the narrative that's taking place in the song? So when we are listening to text, there's a couple layers of work that our brain is doing. We want our brain to work less in order to promote relaxation. So if we eliminate a factor, then that can help us. This process happens so quickly that you don't even realize it, but consider this. Have you ever heard someone speaking a foreign language that you don't understand? At first when you hear it, it's extremely distracting because you're very aware that someone is speaking a language and you don't know what's being said. Now, depending on the type of personality you have, after a while, that distraction might go away and it might just sound like background noise, but we're looking to eliminate as many distractions as possible. The next criteria we look for is we want the music to be repetitive, and that can be both rhythmically and melodically, and usually they work together. The reason we want so much repetition is because it creates familiarity, and when we're familiar with something, our brain has to, again, work less and process less information because we've already heard it before. So it's common in these pieces for the melody particularly to be repeated many, many times. The next criteria we look for is we want the music to be in a simple form. Now don't worry, we don't need to do any music theory analysis, but this goes hand in hand with the repetition that was previously mentioned. In music, when we talk about form, we are talking about labeling the sections of a piece of music. And the way we do that is with capital letters. So we might start with an A section, and then a B section, maybe go back to A, do a C, and then come back to A. And I just described a rondo form for you. But notice how in that example, I was continually coming back to the A section. The A section is typically the opening melody or the main theme that we hear. And we want that to be repeated several times, again for familiarity reasons. A lot of the pieces that we'll be looking at today are in a rounded binary or ternary form. In other words, there are 3 sections, and those sections are labeled A, B, A. So you can see that built into the form, there is repetition. And the final criteria we look for is we want a consistent, calm tempo. Now, what do I mean by calm? Well, that can be interpreted differently person to person, but in general, we're looking for a piece of music that falls between a certain tempo sweet spot of 60 to 80 beats per minute. The reason for this is it imitates our natural resting heart rate. And we are looking to lower our heart rate, so we don't want to listen to anything that is too energetic. Music has been shown to influence our heart rate, so we want to keep it as low as possible because that's how we get to a more relaxed state. So that's a brief overview of the criteria we're looking for relaxing classical music. Again, these are just guidelines, nothing is a hard and fast rule. But we will use this as a template as we talk about pieces in the future and why they might be considered relaxing. So now we're going to go into the top 5 most common or stereotypical pieces of music to fall asleep to, and we will use the criteria we just established to help explain why these pieces are so commonly relaxing. Alright, let's begin talking about these pieces in no particular order. However, we will start with probably the one that most of you are thinking about already, and that is Brahms' Wiegenlied, better known as Brahms' Lullaby. Johannes Brahms was a German composer of the Romantic era who was writing in the mid to late 1800s, and in classical music he's considered one of the 3 Bs, those being the great composers that are Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms. Brahms' Lullaby was written in 1868, and this is the only one on the list that seems to go against one of the criteria I already mentioned, and that is it's originally written for piano and voice. Even though the piece was originally written for voice and piano, we typically only hear it in instrumental versions, and a lot of high-profile musicians have done their own instrumental version. For example, Kenny G and Yo-Yo Ma have both done that. The text of Brahms' Lullaby is pretty straightforward, and it talks about going to sleep. The first line of text translated into English says, "Good evening, good night." There are 2 verses to this piece, however, the first verse is the only one that's original. Brahms added the second verse later. This piece is in an extremely simple form. In fact, if we were to label it, it would simply be A, because the entire piece is repeated exactly, the only thing that changes is the text. The piece is also extremely short. A complete performance, as originally written, would last about a minute and a half. The piece clearly falls into the consistent calm tempo criteria. Another one of the reasons this piece sounds so relaxing is Brahms' use of a technique called syncopation. Syncopation is basically just playing music not on the beat. So if this is the beat, then I would be playing off of that. So when I made that vocalization, that was off the beat, and that's considered a syncopation. What Brahms does is he uses the left hand as the beat, and the right hand is often playing off of that. Together, they form a composite, which means that every beat in the piece is accounted for. It's really cool, it's very subtle, and you won't notice it if you're just listening to it. It's something that you probably need to look at the score to really see. That repetitive syncopation really does give a rocking, cradle-type feel to the piece, and I'm sure it's no surprise that Brahms' Lullaby ended up on this list. The second piece we'll talk about is Debussy's Clair de Lune. Claude Debussy was a French composer who was writing around the turn of the 20th century, and he is known as an impressionistic composer. Now, he personally didn't like that term, but if you remember from art class, impressionistic paintings like those of Monet were the very blurry pictures of nature, and in Debussy's music, we often get these musically obscure sounds that create images. Clair de Lune is French for Moonlight. The piece is actually the third movement of a four-movement suite by Debussy. It was originally written in 1890, but then revised for publication in 1905. One of the coolest elements of this piece is it's actually less rhythmic than the other pieces on this list. There are moments in the music where something is happening every beat and every subdivision of the beat, but there are other moments where chords are just played and time is suspended for a moment. This back and forth makes the piece kind of hypnotic in a way. Another thing that's really cool is his orchestration. Debussy is known for his colorful orchestrations, and orchestrations is basically how a composer chooses where to place certain notes, in what octave, which instrument gets them, and Debussy achieves a very calming sound by spreading a lot of the notes really far apart from each other. There are lots of wide intervals or gaps between notes, and he likes to play a little higher up on the piano, so we get that kind of twinkly effect. The third piece on this list is another Debussy piece, and it's called Rêverie. Rêverie is French for dreams, and this piece was also written in 1890 and was one of Debussy's first early successes. What I really like about this piece is its rhythmic consistency. Throughout the piece, eighth notes are playing the entire time. In other words, there is something moving every half of a beat. The piece is slow, so this doesn't sound energetic at all. It again sounds like something that's rocking, maybe a boat on the water, and only once or twice in the entire piece do those eighth notes stop. Something else that is really cool about this piece is his use of the pentatonic scale. Debussy used this scale a lot later in his career. The pentatonic scale is simply a scale with only 5 notes in it. And it's actually been shown that the pentatonic scale is the natural scale that humans around the world sing in. And if you'd like proof of that, there's a really cool video I'll link to down below, which shows a guy named Bobby McFerrin speaking at a conference, and he gets the audience to sing the pentatonic scale, but he doesn't speak to them at all. He just has them do it visually. It's really cool because he gets an entire audience to do it. Because the pentatonic scale seems to be so universal around the world, it should be no surprise that most of our folk music tends to be in the pentatonic scale or mode. And remember that folk music is one of the 3 most common genres that people listen to for relaxation. The fourth piece on this list is Chopin's Nocturne No. 2. Frédéric Chopin was a Polish composer of the Romantic era. Chopin composed this piece when he was 20 years old, around 1830. This piece is considered his most famous, and there are several things going for it that make it relaxing. First, the piece is extremely repetitive, both rhythmically and melodically. For rhythmically repetitive, the left hand is continuously playing a division of the beat, or if you look at the music, it's always playing eighth notes. In terms of melodically repetitive, as with the other pieces, the main melody is continually coming back. However, this piece has the most ornamentation. Ornamentation is doing little tiny things to change up or add embellishments to the melody. It could be as simple as adding an extra note around the melody. It could be doing something a little fancier like a trill or a tremolo. And even with all those embellishments, it doesn't make hearing the melody any harder. When you look at the music, it might appear confusing. However, when you listen to it, you will hear that melody. And if you're not a musician, don't worry. Your brain will hear it. Because we are familiar with it, and because Chopin repeats it so much, your brain will process that, even if you don't realize it. This piece is also unique from the others on the list in that it's the only one to end with a quasi-improvisational ending. And what that means is there's a section where there are a lot of notes happening really rapidly. However, again, it's not energetic. It sounds more like stars are twinkling or water is going over a waterfall, and it doesn't distract from the calm nature of the piece. The fifth and final piece on this list is Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the first movement only. Ludwig van Beethoven is the very famous German composer. He's the transitional composer between the classic and romantic eras, and you've definitely heard many of his pieces, probably Für Elise, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and the Ode to Joy from his Ninth Symphony. The Moonlight Sonata is his 14th piano sonata, and it was written around 1801. Now, even though this is his 14th piano sonata, this is still considered early in his career. This piece meets all of the criteria as all of the other pieces do. It's repetitive, it's simple, it's a calm tempo, and of course it's instrumental only. But what makes this piece so unique is it's the only one on this list to be in a minor key. Now, if you think back to your general music classes, probably from elementary school, you might remember hearing that keys can be either major or minor, and major are happy keys, and minor are sad keys. This is, unsurprisingly, a huge oversimplification. For minor keys, it's not that they sound sad, they can sound like any emotion. Minor keys are actually unstable. There's a theoretical reason for why that is, but we're not going to talk about that. We're just going to talk about how the music sounds. The most classic example of music in a minor key not being sad is from Beethoven, and I already mentioned it, the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, the famous dun-dun-dun-dum. That piece is in a minor key, and you know it. Does it sound sad? No, it sounds like power, and it sounds like struggle, and there's something really intense going on. But there's nothing sad about it. The Moonlight Sonata's first movement is unstable, but in a very subtle way. It's something that you will feel, but not necessarily grasp right away. What I like about the unstable quality of it is it, for me, mimics my personal struggles with falling asleep, and I actually like that. My personal struggles with falling asleep are always present, and listening to a piece that exemplifies that struggle is actually comforting in a way. It's like you're accepting what's happening, and you can musically let that off of your chest. So there we go. That is the top 5 most common or stereotypical pieces of classical music to fall asleep to. I bet you knew every single one of them, and that's part of the reason why I didn't go into a ton of detail in all of them. And also because I'd be saying the same thing over and over again. They're repetitive, they're calm, they're instrumental, etc. Let me know in the comments below, how many of those pieces have you heard before, and have you used them to fall asleep? Also, let me know, are you going to use these pieces to help with sleep, maybe in the coming week or so? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow me on Facebook and Pinterest. Don't forget to check out my website, calminsomniac.com. I have all kinds of articles on classical music, sleep, product reviews, and you can also sign up for my email list where I'll keep you updated on everything I post. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.